I watched her face change before I understood why. 1 second, Nora Faison was laughing at something I'd said, spinning under my arm in a way that made the string lights above the dance floor blur into streaks. And the next second, her whole expression just emptied out, like someone had reached in and turned a dial. I followed her eyes across the reception tent, trying to find whatever had done that to her, and by the time I found him, standing near the bar in a gray suit like he had every right to be there. I already understood I'd remember that night for reasons that had nothing to do with her sister's wedding. If you've ever watched someone's whole demeanor shift in front of you and had no idea why yet, stick around. Because I'm going to walk you through how we got to that dance floor and what happened after. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from tonight. My name is Grant Ashcombe. I manage a coastal wildlife refuge outside a low-country town called Widows Creek, South Carolina, mostly marsh, mostly quiet, which suited me fine at the time. Because 14 months earlier, I'd lost my younger brother Sam in a car accident on a wet highway outside Charleston, and I hadn't been much good at parties since. I'd only come to that wedding because Tucker, the groom, had grown up 2 houses down from Sam and me, and had asked me himself, in the gentle but insistent way of a man who understood exactly what he was asking. He told me Sam would have wanted the old group together for it. I couldn't argue with that, so I put on a suit I hadn't worn since the funeral and drove out to the plantation-style venue on the marsh, telling myself I'd stay for dinner and slip out before the dancing started. I didn't slip out. Somewhere around the toasts, the wedding coordinator, a woman built like a drill sergeant with a clipboard, started physically pairing off anyone standing alone at the edges of the tent. And I found myself face to face with the maid of honor, a woman with dark hair pinned up with an old-fashioned silver comb, who looked about as thrilled to be pulled onto the dance floor as I was. "I promise I don't bite," she said, holding out a hand. "I'm Nora, my sister's the one in white. I think we're being punished for standing near the exits. We dance badly at first, the kind of stiff, overly polite distance 2 strangers keep, when neither one wants to admit they're enjoying themselves." She asked what I did, and when I told her about the refuge, she lit up in a way that surprised me, told me she used to go out there as a kid with her mother to watch the herons, before her mother passed away 6 years back. I told her about Sam without meaning to, the way grief sometimes just spills out of you when someone finally asks a real question instead of a polite one. She didn't flinch or change the subject the way most people do. She just said, quietly, that she was sorry, and that she understood better than she wished she did what it felt like to lose someone you built your whole life around knowing. That's when her sister and Tucker made their entrance for the first dance, and after that Nora and I stayed on the floor, laughing about nothing in particular. And for a few minutes, I actually forgot to be the guarded, half-present man I'd been at every gathering since Sam died. And then her smile faded. I found him a second later, a man in a gray suit near the bar, watching us with an expression I couldn't read yet, and Nora's whole body had gone rigid in my arms. She excused herself quickly, politely, and walked out toward the dock behind the tent. I gave her a minute, then followed, because something in her face had looked exactly like the thing I saw in my own mirror most mornings. A person trying very hard to hold a normal expression over something that had just cracked open underneath it. She was standing at the end of the dock when I found her, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. "That's Milo," she said before I asked. "My ex-fiancé. Nobody told me he was coming. He's an old friend of Tucker's, apparently, and everyone assumed it wouldn't be a big deal after 2 years." She laughed, short and humorless. "2 years ago he left me standing at the altar. Not called it off ahead of time. Left. Our families, everyone, sitting there in a church for 40 minutes before someone finally told me he wasn't coming. I didn't say anything right away. I'd learned over the previous 14 months that most of what people offer in that moment, the well-meant reassurances, don't actually help. And that sometimes the kindest thing is just to stay standing next to someone until they're ready to talk again. Eventually she asked if I minded walking her back around the outside of the tent so she could avoid him for the rest of the night, and I told her I didn't mind at all. I didn't see Nora again for almost 2 weeks after that, though I thought about that doc more than I probably should have. She found her way back into my life the ordinary way small towns work, showing up at the refuge one Saturday morning with a thermos of coffee and an apology for disappearing on me at the wedding. We ended up walking the marsh trail for 2 hours, and somewhere in that walk she told me the rest of it. That Milo's father had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia 3 weeks before their wedding, the same disease that had slowly taken his own grandfather. And that Milo had apparently spent those 3 weeks convinced he was destined to become a man who forgot the people he loved, and had panicked so completely he couldn't even bring himself to explain it to her face. She'd spent 2 years assuming it meant she wasn't enough to stay for. She'd become, in the time since, the sister everyone leaned on, the one who organized the wedding, who never let her own grief take up space. Because it was easier to be useful than to be seen struggling. I recognized that particular kind of easier. I'd been doing my own version of it since Sam died, showing up, saying the right things, going home to an empty house and letting the quiet swallow whatever I hadn't said out loud all day. Over the following weeks, Nora and I found ourselves doing the things two cautious people do when they're circling something real without quite naming it yet. Coffee that turned into dinner. A sunrise trip out on the refuge boat where we watched a whole marsh wake up around us and barely spoke for an hour, the good kind of silence. Small town being what it is, we ran into Milo twice, once at the hardware store, once at the grocery. And each time I watched Nora hold herself together with the same practiced composure I'd first seen crack on that dance floor. The real turning point came about a month later when Milo showed up at Nora's shop unannounced, asking for 5 minutes, no more. She called me afterward, voice steadier than I expected. He'd finally said the thing he should have said 2 years earlier in person, without an audience. His father's diagnosis had knocked something loose in him that he hadn't known how to carry. And instead of telling her the truth that he was terrified of becoming a man who'd eventually forget her, he'd run, and every day since had made the running worse to undo. He wasn't asking for anything back. He just needed her to know it had never been about her, and that he was sorry for every day he'd let her believe otherwise. Nora told me she cried after he left, not because she wanted him back, but because she finally understood the 2 years hadn't been a referendum on whether she was worth staying for. I think that's the moment something in her finally let go of the version of herself that had to be strong and unaffected in every room she walked into. I won't pretend the rest of it happened fast, because it didn't, not really. We took our time, the way people do when they've both already learned what it costs to move too quickly towards something you're not ready to lose. But by the following spring, when Tucker and Nora's sister threw a first anniversary party out at the same plantation venue, Nora asked me to dance again, on purpose this time. No wedding coordinator with a clipboard involved. She was wearing her mother's silver comb again, the same one from that first night, and partway through the song she reached up, touched it, and told me her mother used to say that comb only ever seemed to show up at the moments in her family's life that actually mattered. I told her I thought that sounded about right. This time, when I looked over her shoulder across the tent, there was no gray suit waiting to change her expression. There was just Sam's old friend group, half of them dancing badly, the marsh going dark and quiet beyond the string lights, and a woman in my arms whose smile, for once, had nowhere else to go but stay. If you've ever watched someone's face change in a crowded room and wondered what quiet thing they were carrying underneath it. I hope this reminded you to be a little gentler with the people around you tonight, because you never really know. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if this one meant something to you, a like helps more than you'd think. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, I hope whatever song is playing in your own life gets to finish all the way through.